The air in the Kato family's grand reception hall was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and quiet, simmering cruelty. Aiko sat at the center of it all, alone, dark island in a sea of pale silk and muted tones. The lacquered surface of the antique table felt cold beneath her forearms. Before her lay the document that would officially sever her from this life, these people, this man. Her husband, Haruto. He stood by the mantelpiece, a flute of champagne in his hand, a smirk playing on his handsome, sharp-featured face. He was the scion of a technology empire, a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. He had wanted her, with her full curves and quiet artist's hands, a striking, exotic ornament to hang on his arm. And now he was done with her. "Just sign it, Aiko," he said, his voice carrying easily across the cavernous room. "Let us not drag this out. You get your settlement. We get our peace." His mother, a woman carved from ice and disapproval, let out a delicate, tittering laugh. His sister echoed it. The sound was like tiny shards of glass scraping against stone. They had never wanted her. A fat, Black American artist with no lineage to speak of. She was a temporary rebellion for their precious Haruto, an embarrassing phase that was now, thankfully, concluded. Aiko picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and cold. She did not look at them. She did not give them the satisfaction of her tears or her anger. She had spent the last 2 years learning to build walls inside herself, to keep the best parts of her safe from their casual corrosiveness. Her gaze was fixed on the paper, the crisp white sheet with its severe black lettering. The sum of their marriage reduced to clauses and stipulations. She remembered the promises, whispered in the dark of their too-large bed. He had loved her body, he'd said. He loved the way she took up space, the solid, grounding presence of her.
It had been a lie.
He loved the idea of her, the novelty. Once the novelty wore off, all that was left was their judgment. Her fingers were steady as she signed her name. Aiko Jones. Not Aiko Kato. She was reclaiming herself with every stroke of ink. The final flourish of the S felt like an exhalation she'd been holding for 2 years. She placed the pen down with a quiet click. "There," Haruto announced to the room, raising his glass. "It is done. To new beginnings." His family murmured their assent. His mother looked at Aiko, her eyes sweeping over her frame with undisguised contempt. "I suppose you will go back to whatever it is you did before. Your little pots and things." "And who will have you now?" his sister added, her voice laced with venomous sweetness. "A divorcee. Used goods. Perhaps you can find another wealthy man foolish enough to be intrigued by your uniqueness." Aiko finally looked up. She met their smug, triumphant faces and felt nothing but a profound, weary stillness. She had nothing to say to them. Her life with them was over. What came next was hers alone. She had a small studio, a network of other artists, a life she had fought to keep separate. It was enough. "I wonder what little man you have lined up," Haruto mused, swirling his champagne. He took a deliberate step closer, invading her space. "Some struggling artist? A professor? You will find their worlds are very small, Aiko. Very poor. You will miss this." He gestured around the room, at the priceless ceramics in their alcoves, the silk tapestries, the view of the meticulously manicured gardens stretching out to the horizon. Aiko pushed her chair back and stood. She was taller than his sister, broader than his mother. She took up space. She had always taken up space. For the first time in 2 years, she did not feel the need to shrink herself. "I am ready to leave," she said, her voice even. "Of course," Haruto said with a dismissive wave. "The driver will take you to the station." He was already turning away, the matter concluded, his ex-wife already fading into an unpleasant memory. That was when the doors to the reception hall opened. They did not swing open. They were opened by 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits who moved with an unnerving, synchronized stillness. They stood on either side of the doorway, heads bowed slightly, creating a path. And then he walked in. The laughter in the room died. The smug satisfaction on Haruto's face curdled into confusion, then disbelief. The air itself seemed to grow colder, heavier. The man who entered was a study in lethal precision. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been spun from shadow and steel. It fit his wide shoulders and lean frame perfectly. His white shirt was stark, his tie a simple black silk. But the cuffs of his suit jacket were cut just a fraction of an inch shorter than was fashionable, a deliberate choice. It was to reveal the intricate, swirling lines of the irizumi that covered his skin, the deep blues and blacks of a dragon's scales that disappeared under the fine fabric. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving planes. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a permanent mark of violence. His black hair was slicked back, severe and perfect, but it was his eyes that held the room hostage. They were dark, utterly devoid of warmth, and they saw everything. He moved like the room owed him space. His steps were silent on the polished marble floor. He did not look at Haruto. He did not acknowledge the Kato family, frozen like statues in a tableau of their own arrogance. His eyes found Aiko, and only Aiko. Haruto finally found his voice, though it was strained. Who are you? This is a private residence. The man did not answer him. He stopped directly in front of Aiko. He was close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something cold, like winter air. He reached out, his movements economical and deliberate. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was light, but it felt like an anchor, a claim. Everyone in the room saw the large, jade ring on his little finger. They saw the way his tattooed wrist emerged from the sleeve of his suit. They knew, in this city, in their world, there were men you did not cross. And the man standing before them was the one even those men feared. He finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over Haruto with an unnerving lack of interest, the way a predator might glance at something it had already decided was prey. "The signing is complete," he said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone that was somehow more menacing than a shout. It was not a question. It was a statement. Aiko could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. "Good," he said. He looked at Haruto, and for the first time, a flicker of something, cold, hard purpose, entered his eyes. "You'll have your driver bring her things to my address."
I touched. I opened.
Within the hour. Haruto's face had gone pale. Your address?" The man's hand on Aiko's shoulder tightened fractionally. "Do I need to repeat myself?"
No, Haruto está mered.
"No, of course not." The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then he looked back at Aiko, his expression softening by a degree so small only she could have noticed it. "We are leaving." He guided her toward the door, his hand a firm, protective weight on her back. The two men in suits fell in behind them, a silent, deadly rear guard. As they walked out of the reception hall, away from the shattered arrogance of the Kato family, Aiko felt the world tilting on its axis. She had signed a paper to escape one cage, only to walk willingly into another. This one, however, was guarded by a dragon. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt something other than fear. She felt a strange, dangerous sense of peace. The silence they left behind was absolute. The ride from the Kato estate was a study in contrasts. The car, a black, armored Maybach, was silent, gliding through the bustling Tokyo streets like a phantom. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken words. Aiko sat beside him, the scent of his sandalwood cologne a constant, grounding presence. She watched the city lights blur past the tinted window, a world she was once part of, now distant and foreign. The opulent misery of the mansion faded behind them, replaced by the quiet, lethal aura of the man next to her. Ryu stared straight ahead, his profile stern and unreadable. His hands rested on his knees, the jade ring on his finger catching the intermittent glow of the streetlights. He had not spoken since they'd left the house. Aiko finally broke the silence, her voice softer than she intended. "You didn't have to come." His head turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Yes," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I did. They're not worth your time, Rhea. They're just empty people." "They disrespected you," he stated, as if it were the simplest, most fundamental law of the universe. They did it publicly. That was their mistake. He paused, his gaze intense. It will not happen again. A phone buzzed, a low, insistent vibration from his inner pocket. He retrieved it, his movements fluid and precise. He answered, speaking in low, rapid Japanese. Aiko couldn't follow the words, but she understood the tone. It was the voice of command. Quiet, absolute. He gave a series of clipped orders, his face a mask of cold calculation. Aiko caught a few words she recognized from Haruto's business dealings, shipping contracts, subsidiaries, board members. He was not sending men with guns. He was sending a surgeon to dismantle a life's work. It was cleaner, more thorough, more terrifying. When he ended the call, he slid the phone back into his pocket, and the silence returned, heavier this time. Aiko felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. She had met Ryu 6 months ago at a gallery opening. He'd been standing in front of one of her larger ceramic pieces, a dark, abstract sculpture about fractured identity. He hadn't spoken to her about the art. He'd simply said, "This has strength. The artist who made it is not weak." It was the first time anyone had seen past the facade of Haruto's wife in years. Their meetings had been secret, stolen hours in quiet cafes and private gardens. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. A man who ran Tokyo's underworld but who could speak with profound insight about 17th century pottery glazes. He never touched her with overt passion, but his gaze was a physical touch, a constant, assessing weight that made her feel more seen than her husband's hands ever had. Now, in the close confines of the car, the line between that quiet, intense art patron and the ruthless Yakuza boss had dissolved. They were one and the same. He must have felt her unease. He shifted, turning his body slightly toward her. "You are safe with me, Aiko." "Am I?" The question was out before she could stop it. It was not an accusation, but a genuine inquiry. He considered her for a long moment. "No," he said finally, his honesty a cold shock. "You are not safe. The world I live in is not safe. But you will not be harmed. There is a difference." He reached out then. She thought he might touch her face, her hand. Instead, his fingers went to a stray curl that had escaped her carefully arranged hair. He gently tucked it behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, his fingers surprisingly cool against her skin. It was the most tender gesture she had ever received from him, and it happened in the wake of him ordering a man's financial ruin. The contradiction was dizzying. "No one will ever speak to you that way again," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle deep in her bones. It was not a promise. It was an oath. They arrived at his penthouse, a fortress of glass and chrome that crowned one of Shinjuku's tallest skyscrapers. The view was breathtaking, the whole of Tokyo a glittering, electric tapestry at their feet. But the space itself was stark, minimalist to the point of being monastic. Black leather, polished steel, dark wood. There were no personal effects, no photographs, no clutter. The only art was a single, large scroll painting of a storm-tossed sea hanging on one wall. It was beautiful and violent. He led her to the living area and gestured to the sprawling sofa.
"Seat."
"I will get you something to drink." He returned with 2 glasses of whiskey, the amber liquid glowing in the low light. He handed one to her and sat not beside her, but in a severe armchair opposite, placing them in a formal, almost confrontational arrangement. He watched her over the rim of his glass. "Tell me how you are feeling." I don't know," she admitted.
Relieved.
Terrified. Numb. "Haruto will be ruined by morning," he said, his voice flat. "His family's company will be a shell by the end of the week. They will lose everything. Their name will be worth less than the paper your divorce was signed on." Aiko swallowed. A part of her should have felt horror or pity. She felt a cold, hard satisfaction instead. That realization scared her more than anything Rio had done. What was she becoming? Before she could answer, his phone vibrated again. This time, the call was short. The change in him was instantaneous. The cold calm was replaced by a stillness that was far more dangerous. It was the stillness of a predator that has caught a scent. "What is it?" she asked. He stood up, walking to the vast window and looking down at the city below. The Inagawakai.
Arriba al clan.
They saw my visit to the Kato estate as an act of sentimentality, a distraction. They believe I have a new weakness. Aiko's blood ran cold. Me. He turned from the window, his eyes locking with hers. They sent a message. They set fire to a small pottery studio in the Inaka district. The whiskey glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Her studio, her sanctuary, the one place in the world that was entirely hers. The kills, her wheels, years of work, her glazes, the pieces she was preparing for a new show. All of it. Smoke and ash. Despair washed over her, so potent it was nauseating. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. But then something else rose through the grief. A white-hot, razor-sharp rage. They had not just attacked her property. They had attacked her soul. Ryo was already speaking into his phone, his voice a low, lethal hiss. He was giving orders to assemble a team. He was planning a retaliation that would be swift and bloody. A war was about to start over her little studio. "Wait," she said, her voice raspy. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "Ryo, wait." He lowered the phone, his eyes narrowed. "This is not your concern, Aiko. It is my concern." "It was my studio," she shot back, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "They left a mark, didn't they?"
A dog.
"What was it?" He looked surprised by her vehemence. "A red spider lily. It is their symbol." Aiko's mind raced.
No.
Not just the symbol. Was there anything else? Anything small? Out of place? Ryu spoke into the phone again, relaying her question. He listened, then looked back at her. "My man says yes. A small tag, next to the lily. The letters yes in white." Aiko's breath hitched. E.S. Endo Shoji. A young, arrogant street artist she'd had to run out of the alley behind her studio a month ago for harassing another female artist. He was talented but volatile, always bragging about his connections. He had told her she'd be sorry. At the time, she dismissed it as empty threats. "I know who did it," she said, her voice trembling with cold fury. "Not just which clan. The specific man who lit the match. Endo Shoji. He has a room above the pachinko parlor on Chidori Street, 3rd floor. He brags about his work to anyone who will listen. He'll be there now, celebrating." Ryu stared at her, his expression unreadable. He had been about to launch an assault on an entire clan, a move that would have plunged them into a brutal, drawn-out conflict. She had just handed him a scalpel, a way to cut out the heart of the offense with surgical precision, sending a message of terrifying intelligence, not just brute force. She had just become a part of his world, an asset. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. He slowly raised the phone to his mouth, his eyes never leaving hers. He gave a new set of orders. Precise, quiet, lethal. When he was done, he ended the call, and the silence in the penthouse was absolute. "You should have been afraid," he said, his voice low and rough. "You should have told me to handle it and hidden in this room. You should have run." Aiko met his gaze, the fire in her chest burning away the last of her fear. "Where would I run, Ryo? Back to Naruto? Back to a world that laughs while my life turns to ash? You think I'd be safer there?" She took a step closer, closing the space between them. "I told myself that being with you was just a way out, a temporary shield." She shook her head, the admission tearing from her throat. "I was lying to myself. I'm not here because I'm scared of them. I'm here because for the first time in my life, I'm not scared of what a man like you sees when he looks at me." His composure finally broke. A flicker of something raw and unguarded crossed his face. He reached for her, his hands framing her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheeks. His touch was electric. Just then, her phone, the one from her old life, buzzed on the table where she'd left it. A message from an unknown number. Ryo's eyes hardened. He released her and picked up the phone. He read the message, and his body went rigid. He turned the screen to her. It was a picture of her, standing in this very room, looking out the window, taken from a building across the way. It had been taken only minutes ago, Below the image was a simple line of text. The dragon guards his treasure. But even fortresses can fall. They were no longer just sending messages. They were watching her. She was no longer a symbol of his weakness. She was the target. Chaos did not erupt. In Ria's world, chaos was a vulgarity. Instead, a chilling, deliberate calm descended upon the penthouse. Men appeared, materializing from the shadows of the apartment as if they had been there all along. They were specters in dark suits, moving with quiet efficiency, checking windows, securing perimeters, their faces impassive masks. Ryu stood in the center of it all, a vortex of absolute stillness. He issued a series of clipped commands, his voice never rising above a low murmur, yet each word carried the weight of an execution order. He was a general moving pieces on a board, and Aiko was the queen he had to protect at all costs. He turned to her, his dark eyes sweeping over her, not with affection, but with a cool, tactical assessment. They will try to take you. They will not do it here. This place is secure. They will wait until you are in transit. They believe you are soft. Predictable. He handed her a small, sleek burner phone and a tiny, flat device that looked like a credit card. This phone has one number in it.
Mine.
The other device is a panic button. If you are ever separated from me or my men, you press it. Do you understand? She nodded, her hand closing around the cold plastic. I am moving you to a secure location outside the city tonight, he continued. The convoy will be ready in 20 minutes. But they will anticipate a convoy. They will be looking for the Maybach. For a show of force, he paused, his gaze boring into hers. We will not be in the convoy. His plan was simple and elegant in its audacity. While a heavily armed decoy convoy sped towards the expressway, he and Aiko would slip out through a service exit into a nondescript sedan and melt into the city's late-night traffic. But as his men prepared, Aiko's mind was racing. They thought she was soft. Predictable. The ex-wife of a tycoon, a pampered artist. They would expect her to huddle in the back of a car, terrified. They would expect her to run and hide. No, she said suddenly. Ryu and his senior lieutenant, a grim-faced older man, both turned to look at her. The plan is sound, Aiko, Ryu said, his tone leaving no room for debate. It's a good plan if I'm cargo, she shot back. But I'm not. They're hunting me. Let's give them a hunt. She looked him directly in the eye, her own plan forming, born of fury and a desperate need to not be a victim. Don't hide me. Use me. She explained it quickly, her voice low and urgent. They wouldn't go to a safe house. They would go somewhere public. Somewhere she was known. The Aoima Pottery Collective, a sprawling warehouse space where she sometimes taught workshops.
It was closed for the night.
They would wait for her there. But she would arrive alone on the subway. Public, crowded, 1,000 witnesses. It was the last thing they would expect. Ryu's lieutenant looked at her like she was insane. But Ryu looked at her with a new, dawning light in his eyes.
He saw the steel she was showing him.
It's too dangerous, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. It's more dangerous to be predictable, she insisted. They want to isolate me. So I'll surround myself with people. I'll get off at the Gayami station, walk the 3 blocks to the collective. Your men can be everywhere. In the crowd, on the street, on the rooftops. You can watch my every step. If they make a move, they'll have to do it in the open. It was a gamble. A huge one. But it was her gamble. It was her taking control. After a long, tense silence, Ryo gave a single, sharp nod. An hour later, Aiko was descending the stairs into the belly of the Tokyo subway system. She wore simple jeans, a dark hoodie, and sneakers. She looked like any other woman heading home late. But her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every face in the crowd was a potential threat. Every person who brushed past her was a possible attacker. She saw them, though. Ryu's men. A man reading a newspaper whose eyes never scanned the page. A couple holding hands whose stances were too wide, too ready. They were ghosts in the machine and she was the bait. She boarded the train, found a spot by the door, and held onto the pole, her knuckles white. The train rattled through the dark tunnels. At her stop, she exited with the throng of people, her head down but her senses screaming. The air on the street was cool. 2 blocks to go. They came in the second block. It was a quieter stretch, lined with closed shops. 3 of them. They moved out of an alleyway, silent and fast, trying to box her in. Her blood went cold. This was it. She didn't scream. She didn't run towards the collective. She did the opposite. She spun around and ran back towards the station, towards the light and the noise. She did the one thing they weren't prepared for. She created chaos. She slammed into a group of salarymen, shouting apologies, knocking one of them over. She shoved past a couple, making them yell at her. She became a public nuisance, a disturbance. Her pursuers were forced to slow down, their anonymity compromised. They couldn't just grab a woman who was drawing this much attention. She reached the station entrance, her lungs burning. She could hear them behind her, cursing. She stumbled down the first few stairs, and then they were on her. A hand grabbed her arm. But it was too late. Rio's men descended. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a silent, brutal ballet of violence. One of her attackers was slammed into the wall, another pulled back into the shadows. The one holding her arms suddenly grunted, his grip slackening as a knife, held by the grim-faced lieutenant, was pressed to his throat. And then Rio was there. He moved through the fray untouched, his presence alone enough to end the fight. He reached her, his hands gripping her arms, his eyes blazing as he scanned her for injuries. "Are you hurt?"
His voice was a raw rasp.
"No," she gasped, adrenaline singing in her veins.
"Ai fine."
He pulled her against him, a hard, possessive embrace that was anything but gentle. It was a claim, a statement. He buried his face in her hair for a split second, a moment of unguarded relief, before his control snapped back into place. Back in the penthouse, the city lights felt different. They were not just a beautiful view anymore. They were a web of potential dangers. Aiko stood in the middle of the room, the tremors of adrenaline still shaking her. Ryu stood before her, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stark in the dim light. He said nothing for a long time, just watched her. "My men were in position," he said finally, his voice tight with a control that was barely holding. "The plan was for them to intercept them before they reached you. I told you to walk to the collective." "And let them corner me in a quiet alley?" she retorted, her voice shaking but firm. "They expected me to be prey. I decided not to be." He took a step closer. The air crackled between them. He looked at her, and she saw it all in his eyes. The fury that she had been endangered, the shock that she had saved herself, and something else, something deeper and more profound. Respect. "They thought you were my weakness," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer conceal. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. "A liability. A soft target to be used against me." He tilted her head up, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "They are wrong," he whispered, the words a brand against her skin. "You are not my weakness, Aiko. You are my fortress." The cost of that statement hung in the air between them. Her old life was gone, burned to the ground. Her anonymity was a ghost. To stay with him was to choose this life of violence and vigilance forever. For him, the cost was just as high. He had let someone into his guarded world, a world that would now relentlessly test her, use her, try to break her to get to him. He did not kiss her. The moment was too raw, too real for a simple kiss. Instead, he took her hand, the one that was still trembling, and brought it to his chest. He pressed her palm flat against the hard muscle, directly over his heart. He held it there, his own larger hand covering hers. Beneath her palm, she could feel it, the slow, steady, lethal rhythm of his heart. It was the calmest thing in the room. The city glittered below, a million lives she could no longer live, a world she no longer belonged to. She had walked away from one cage and refused to be a victim in another. She had made a choice. She looked from their joined hands to his dark, unreadable eyes. The world outside was a storm, but here, in the heart of the danger, with her hand pressed against his, She was finally, terrifyingly, home. She did not pull her hand away.